Here from Emerge Africa, it gives us great pleasure to welcome our presenters today, who will report back on a very successful OEGlobal Conference in Cape Town that took place in the beginning of March. Speaking today is the OEGlobal Program Chair, Dr. Glenda Cox, and Sukaina Walji from the Research on Open Educational Resources for Development. Sukaina is a communications strategist for that project. And with us also today, our very own Tony Carr and Dr. Nicola Pallet, who are both with the Emerge Africa projects. They will all speak about their experiences and highlights from the conference. So I'll actually just
Over to you, Glenda. Are you there? Glenda, perhaps you want to unmute your mic?
All right, our apologies for that. We are working on getting Glenda back to speak with us as the first presenter.
Hi everyone, I'm sorry about that. I actually lost connection, so I'm hoping that that's not going to happen again. So if I do disappear, what do you want me to do?
So you're happy to use my computer?
Okay, Nicola's suggesting that perhaps I come through to her office, just in case I keep on losing connection like that. So I'll be back in a moment.
Just click the mic.
All right, I know that at that department, Nicola's office is just like a bit down from Glenda's office. So no, it'll take just a couple of minutes to get Glenda back. Maybe in the meantime, I would encourage you, those participating today, just to maybe make a brief presentations of yourselves in the text chat.
Hi, okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Oh, welcome back. All right, Glenda is on now. Yes, Glenda, we can hear you.
Now I'm in Nicola's office. Hopefully this is more reliable. Okay, so I lost you for a little moment there, but I presume I should just get started. Yeah, so a little bit about the Open Education Global Conference. This is an annual event. It's been hosted all over the world, in the US, in Britain, in Vietnam, Poland, Slovenia, so a real range of different countries. And for the first time ever, in 2017, it was hosted in South Africa. So this was quite an exciting moment. And essentially the way the process worked was it was hosted by myself and a committee at UCT, and the OEGlobal Conference committee. So we had support from them, very experienced conference presenters. And the Open Education Global Conference is the place where educators from around the world meet to talk about open education. And when we talk about open education, we're talking about open education resources, so essentially teaching materials that are made open through a Creative Commons license. So hopefully most of you know, I'm looking at my audience, I think you do know what open education resources are, and that's the backbone of this particular conference, research around open education. So this conference was held for the first time in Cape Town, and we were very excited that this was an opportunity to get more delegates from Africa, and we knew that we would be getting quite a few delegates from Raw4D, and Sukaina will chat about that a little bit later. So we knew we were going to get this wonderful wide audience. And our vision for the conference, let me go back. Our vision for this conference, it's actually a further on slide. Let me go through this first. Okay, just to run through who attended. So it featured 111 sessions, 80 presentations, action labs, panels, a flip presentation, and delegates, as I said, coming from 38 different countries. So really a globally diverse conference. And this is the aim of this OEGlobal Conference. There are other open conferences, one in the US that is more focused on the US, and one in England, OER 17, coming up next week. So very importantly, our theme for this conference was open for participation. And we had a particular vision that included inviting all forms of open to the conference. So we invited local connections in open data, open science, open access, and open governance. We sent out emails, we did as much marketing as we could. However, they did not arrive. And this was an important learning lesson for us, because we wanted to try and get all different opens into one particular conference. And it seems that we're not ready for that yet. So this was a learning. I don't feel it was particularly a failure, but it was quite an interesting aspect that we didn't quite get the range of people with research backgrounds that we wanted. Nevertheless, it was certainly open for participation from people from all over the world, new researchers, more experienced researchers, this wonderful range of tremendous expertise in open education was brought to Cape Town. The program is available, and I know that there are links to the program in this presentation, and you can have an idea of the range of different topics. And what I tried to do as a program chair was to cluster these topics so that people who were perhaps interested in something like policy and OER could go into the room and have various experts on that particular theme talk to them. What I also did as a program chair is to try and get people to talk to each other that wouldn't normally talk to each other. So there are a number of communities, including that Raw4D one we'll hear about later. And sometimes we tend to kind of talk to each other a lot. And the idea with this conference was to put Raw4D presenters with other presenters so that they could build their networks and connections, and we could really learn from all the research that has been done in that project. So we had other themes like opening up higher education was a big theme. We had a very strong theme around open educational practice, and I think Nicola will talk a little bit later on about that and about the contributions of Catherine Cronin. And besides Catherine's presentation, there was a lot of mention of open educational practice. And just to briefly introduce that, and Nicola will talk a little bit more about it, it's the idea of not only these static open education resources, but actually using those resources in your teaching. So the pedagogy of open education, what we can do in all aspects of our teaching to make our teaching more open. So that's open education practice. We had a stream on MOOCs, a lot of interest around MOOCs, still seems to be quite a hot topic. And then we had all the research about adoption and impact of OER from not only the RAW4D groups, but also a number of case studies across Europe and North America. Then we had a very specialized area of OER and technology as well, so that was also particularly useful. Then what this conference does do every year, which is quite a kind of celebration, is we have award winners. And these Open Education Awards celebrate a range of different qualities. So we'll have open educators, leaders in open education, we'll have open education resources themselves, open education sites, research, and there's quite a long nomination process and a committee that sits to award these particular prizes. And on the slide you can see the lovely globes that we created for the top 4 awards in open education. And if you follow that link, you will kind of get a sense of who won those in 2017, but you can also go back to the older links to previous year's winners. And just from a sort of local slant, we had Johan Fagan winning for his open access textbook. And Johan Fagan's work has been quite revolutionary. He just he realized that in Africa there was a real need for specialized textbooks in his area, and approached the publishers who were quite determined not to release his book as an open education resource. So he sat down and decided to create his own resource, and he did this with the help of various experts, and it has had quite a phenomenal reach, and you'll see on the side with about 1 million chapters being downloaded. So it was very nice to see him get recognition for that. We also have had previous award winners from UCT, and if you go to that link you will see examples of really beautifully designed courses and a range of different toolkits that people have created that you might find useful in your own teaching. There were a lot of debates, new and old, and this particular slide shows a book by Martin Weller, and I won't even begin to speak on behalf of Martin Weller, but I know that one of the things that comes out of his book is this idea that openness has won some victories in that we are so much more aware of openness. But we also know, all of us in this room, that there's a lot of work still to be done around openness. And although we've made inroads, it's now that the really interesting work is coming up around open educational practices and MOOCs and other areas that have opened up around openness. So although openness is one, we're continuing to do our work to make sure that we extend the reach of open education resources. And then I think Nicola wanted to talk briefly here about this particular presentation that she enjoyed. So one of the problems with being the program chair is that I didn't get to that many sessions. So I can talk about a few of them, but not all. So Nicola's gonna chip in and talk about specialized sessions that she really enjoyed.
Thank you, Glenda. Yeah, it was a really, nice experience. I was a newbie to OEGlobal. It was my first ever OEGlobal conference, and I must say I got a lot from it. Particularly even the first day. So we had our UCT Vice Chancellor, Dr. Max Price, and Prof. Narendra Bajnath, who's the Chief Executive Officer from the Council on Higher Education in South Africa, opening the first day of the conference. And there were a lot of questions around measuring impact and inviting us to think more about access. And particularly, here I tweeted one of the presentations I was at. The presenter said, well, if all students take away from the open movement is free textbooks, have we failed? And he says, argues that students really need to participate in the open movement a lot more as well. I will share also a link. I took a lot of videos and photos from OEGlobal, including recordings of the morning, big important sort of keynotes. So you can have a look at those if you just follow this link in your own time. You can watch those. I thought South African participants really added something to the discussion. There was a lot of focus on access and questions around access, and are we making an impact? Are we improving access to education through resources? And then because of the recent student protests, a lot of conversations around decolonizing education that came into the MOOC panel as well, that's also in the recordings. They've given their permission for it to be shared online. And it was around, different countries, different stages of colonialism, and whether MOOCs from the global north are perhaps seen as a sort of imperialist force, or do we need to be creating more local resources or wrapping international MOOCs and localizing them? The conference also had a lot of focus where people were encouraged to think beyond OERs as an object and to think more about our practices. So not just adopting things from elsewhere or appreciating that these open resources exist, but encouraging people to start creating things for their contexts and to engage in open educational practices. So here's one, excuse me, for example, from Frida, who spoke about characteristics and enabling factors for inclusive practices, which they use as part of teacher open educational practices in East Africa and India. It was really nice to voice is gone back. All right. I hope it's maybe just your connection and it's not like that for everyone. Okay now. Okay, great. Thanks. That was really nice to hear from not only global presenters, but local presenters and people from elsewhere in the global south. What OEGlobal meant for Emerge Africa was thinking about future events, so stay tuned, and networking with future speakers. So we've got an event coming up with Glenda pretty soon, so stay tuned for that, as well as Catherine Cronin and a whole bunch of other people. So yeah, keep glued to your Emerge Africa newsletter. Don't miss a newsletter. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Tony.
Thanks, Glenda and Nicola. Yep, we had a very active and very productive time at OEGlobal. Lots of networking, lots of plugging into the discourse and concepts and various conversations. Part of what we did was to get involved in leading 2 events at OEGlobal. One of these was an action lab in partnership with colleagues at Royal 4D, Unleashing the Power of Online Networks Through Openness, where we basically looked at the challenges and opportunities for growing online networks for openness, including colleagues from Royal 4D doing a lot of contribution about how they network and how they measure and visualize those networks. And the whole thing ended up with a peer assist where, curiously enough, we ended up with a UCT colleague getting support from participants in the meeting to think through how she would grow the work that she was doing with disseminating open resources in accounting. Okay, on to the next slide. The other event that we held was a presentation which I did in partnership with Nicola on the life cycle of the Facilitating Online course, which was designed as an OER originally in 2008, and now 9 years later still has life and relevance, partly because what we've done is to redesign and re-interface some parts of the course, and partly because we're seeing that it's being picked up on and adopted by various people. Okay, I hear my sound's been a bit distorted. In fact, it would have been good to actually have that in the main chat. Is sound better now? Okay, good, thank you, great. Just move the mic a bit further away from my face. We got some very good feedback on this from our colleague from SAST, Brenda Mallinson, who's done some interesting work to repurpose sections of the Facilitating Online course as well. All presentations available, so I won't go into any detail now. Among the presentations available on the site, there are so many gems that I'll just give you a few of the ones that also appealed to me. One of these was Catherine Cronin's distinction between how educators can present as networked individuals or networked educators. Networked individuals when they're involved in balancing privacy and openness and developing digital literacy, but they only get classified by her as networked educators when they're also showing that they value social learning and involving that in their courses and challenging traditional roles of educators. It was quite a small study in terms of the number of participants, but very conceptually useful in terms of the distinctions that she drew. Then Catherine Ngugi from OER Africa, who's been with OER Africa for 10 years, presented reflections and insights from a project over the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 years with 4 different African universities. And this is just one of the slides where she presents some insights about how the different universities were using OER and making their use effective through various open practices. From Brenda Mallinson, talking about a project with the Open University of Tanzania, about all the different ways in which that project modeled openness in relation to design, materials development, pedagogy, online provision, licensing, and open accessibility. Not sure why I'm echoing. Don't have this open anywhere else. Okay. And then, maybe it's because our offices are so close, Nicola. Haha, okay. Great. A reflection I'd like to share about this conference and about the importance of the openness in the title actually being realized in the way the conference worked. I got there and found that there were interesting people from those 38 different countries with different experiences to share, that all of the debates, even up to the high-level strategic debates, were available to everybody, and that there was a very good representation of people from my educational technology networks as well. And for the first time ever, I felt that I was part of a movement for openness in education. Before, I'd been surrounded in some projects at UCT by people who were absolutely passionate, absolutely committed, and total activists. And there are times when I actually had felt, okay, these guys are the experts. I don't know how much I'm a part of it. But at OEGlobal, I realized that actually I'm part of this, and I have been for a long time. And I suspect that there may be others as well who had a very similar sentiment. And it'd be interesting to hear if that is a shared experience. And I suspect it's back to Glenda at this point.
Hi, Sukaina. I know I'm.
Yeah, just.
So shall I
Oh, Sukaina. Okay, go for it, Sukaina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenda.
Yeah, just to say that we're celebrating the Year of Open this year, and we launched, this is actually launched at the beginning of the year. There's a very nice website, literally yearofopen.org, and they have events linked to Open every month, and they've been taking a theme for each month: open access, open reflection, and it's really worthwhile going to have a look to see what's happening with Year of Open. So just a little plug for that. And I think then on to Sukaina. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Emerge Africa, for inviting me to talk about the RAW4D project. So our project is the Research on Open Educational Resources for Development, for short. It's known as RAW4D. And as you can see, this was a very important conference for the RAW4D project, given that there were so many members of the RAW4D network. If I just explain a little bit about what RAW4D is. It's a 3.5-year research project that is comprised of 18 sub-projects across 26 countries, 3 regions, South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South and Central Asia. And the projects are all around some aspect of research around the adoption and impact of open educational resources. So open educational resources, as I think most of you know, are free, available online, well, can be online, or digital educational resources that have inbuilt permissions. And the rationale for the research is that they are purported to address some of the challenges or be used as a response to some of the educational challenges worldwide, including access to information, costs of education, widening access, improving affordability, improving the quality of learning materials. And even if you haven't really used OER or explicitly, there are open education resources all over the internet. So the first kind of birth of open education resources formally was the release of course materials and courseware from MIT. And then following that, there's a whole sort of decade and a half of a whole movement that sprang up around sharing educational resources freely through repositories, and many institutions have developed OER policies, and that there is a discernible open educational resources movement. Our project, though, is not an advocacy. It's not saying open educational resources are the answer. In fact, it's a research project that's really trying to understand
what is happening when people are adopting open educational resources, and what is the impact, if any? How are people adopting open educational resources? So we have 18 sub-projects across a number of clusters, and in fact Glenda is the lead researcher on sub-project 4, which is looking, or was looking, at academics' adoption of open educational resources in a higher education context. And I'm also a researcher on one of the Raw4D projects, which is looking at open education resources in and as MOOCs, and is looking at the UCT MOOCs project as a form of OER and the impact of academics using or developing MOOCs as OER on their open educational practices. So those are just, we're also involved in the research. So just back to what Raw4D was sort of trying to do or achieve at OEGlobal. This is the third meeting of the entire network, and we have somebody from all of the 18 projects at the conference, which was a huge organizational feat, and our project manager Tess Cartmill has to be congratulated on just getting everybody there. And it was the second OEGlobal at which all the researchers were there. The first one we got together was in Canada in 2015, and this was quite a joyous occasion for the network, because we're all really at the reporting phase, the releasing of findings, and really having something to say now. When you first start a research project on this scale, there's a lot of anticipation and hope about how things will go, and then there's all sorts of bumps in the road in terms of how the research does actually unfold. And so this was really an opportunity for the Raw4D researchers to come together, to network, but also share their research with the wider open community. So we had I did a count because I'd lost track of more than 15 presentations, and then there's some additional posters. We had 2 keynote panel presentations and a number of collaborative presentations with other networks. And Tony mentioned the one around building networks. So the next slide is just a quick overview of where we are in terms of the research. So the project is based or managed at the University of Cape Town at the Centre for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, SILT. And there's headed by the principal investigator Cheryl Hodgkinson-Williams, and there's a team of 6 other people who provide various research support services, including project management, communications, evaluation, research capacity building, curation, publications. To manage a project as large as this, we've got something like almost 100 researchers, 16 time zones. I mean, it's quite an endeavor. So we've got a strong research team that manages this entire process. And our main research question is whether, how, and for whom, and under what circumstances can engagement with open educational practices and resources provide equitable access to relevant, high-quality, affordable, and sustainable education in the Global South. And that's our overall research question. I'm not going to go through this. I had just put this in case we just need to remind ourselves of what OER are, but I think I've already mentioned that. And I'm not going to, I'm sure you're very glad to go through all of the 15 or 18 presentations, but I'm just going to share some particular highlights. But just to say that all of the presentations are on the Open Education Consortium website, and also many of them are on the Raw4D SlideShare. And what I did do also to capture this kind of almost seminal moment in our network was I created a Storyfy, which is, if you click on the link whenever you want to, you go to a website, or a small website, that has a digital story of some of the interactions, events, photographs of our experience at OEGlobal. Really, what I did was just select some of the tweets that people, where people mentioned Raw4D, took photographs, but also to try and build a story of how people were feeling or interacting, or say, what they were saying. And that's been quite a nice thing to do, along with the kind of more heavy duty work of actually just sharing the presentations and writing blogs, and it's very much part of our communications and dissemination strategy is that you do the research, but you also need to get it out to people for whom it would be useful, because we really want people to make use of it. So first of all, the key rationale for being there was to share research findings, and the picture on the right with the is our PI, Cheryl Hodgkinson-Williams, and her presentation was really very important in the sense that she is actually now doing a meta-synthesis of the entire body of research from the 18 sub-projects. So she's in the process of that, because what she's trying to do is to say, well, there's a reason for why this project was done as a network project, not just 18 sub-projects that operated on their own. They are 18 independent sub-projects with their own research methods and their findings, but that there's some story to be told here about the nature of OER adoption and the nature of open education practices in the Global South. So her work now is to really look at what story can be told about this. So she presented on her metasynthesis framework, which is at the planning stages now that the findings are coming in, so that she can have something to say around some of the commonalities as well as some of the differences in context about OER adoption and impact. And then the picture at the bottom there which is quite small there, but it's our deputy principal investigator, Patricia Arinto, who was a keynote speaker, part of a keynote panel, and she spoke about the importance of now looking at what is happening with OER adoption and what are the kinds of practices that can and how can we identify what those practices are to inform how OER can be used. And as I think Nicola and Tony mentioned earlier, open education practices, or OEP, really became quite a seminal theme throughout this conference, and perhaps represents a kind of maturing of the state of OER research, of OER practice, and what people are finding and doing, and also giving new names to things. So we heard conversations around like open pedagogy, network digital learning, hybrid learning, all of these things that involve openness, that involve OER, but really are about how to enhance the teaching and learning process, or design and teaching and learning environments to move more towards openness, and that the openness has a purpose in the sense of promoting access, equity and quality in educational outcomes. So that was really going back to research findings, that was really the most important purpose for being at OEGlobal. We also wanted to share the research process. It's how you do the research. The Raw4D project has taken an approach of conducting research in the open. And what does that mean? And overall, it's about being as open and visible as possible, so that we can actually be accountable and say this is how we are doing the research, not only that we are doing the research and what the findings are. So quite a number of our network team members, that's the central hub team that is based here at the University of Cape Town, we presented on our what we call particular portfolios. So mine is communication, and so I presented on our strategies for engaging stakeholders openly as part of a poster. That's a picture of me there. And then our curation and dissemination manager, Michelle Williams, presented on our curation and dissemination strategy, which is really around how we curate our outputs and how we are developing our publications process, because we're going to be publishing our findings in an edited volume later on this year. So we're also very keen to share how we're doing our research. And then lastly, one of the most pleasurable aspects of the conference, and this was particularly should be a credit to Glenda for the way that these opportunities were designed, is around networking. We are a network that's across 16 time zones and 3 continents, and Most of our interactions are digital or virtual, so it's a real bonus when you can get together. So there was plenty of formal and informal networking. So we had posters and a table where people could come and ask about RAW4D, but there was just all the kind of casual networking and the serendipitous conversations that happened. And we were also particularly lucky that our funders from the IDRC joined us at this conference and were kind of part of our sort of wider network and wider team. So that was also, you know, for me, a really amazing kind of experience personally as well, to see some of these networks that we've been nurturing over 3 years really mature and develop into new ones as well, and new friendships and cooperation. And that's all for me now. And that at the conference that it was announced that the next conference would be in the Netherlands at the University of Delft. So I'll hand over back to Nicola now, or whoever, Jakob is there. Thank you.
I believe Sukaina was scheduled as the last presenter. I'm wondering if either Tony or, I know Nicolas left already, but maybe Tony has some other things that he would like to share and some thoughts. Tony?
I don't need to talk anymore. I think at this stage there's an opportunity for participants to ask questions or share observations, given that some people were actually at the conference. So please enter your questions or observations in the text chat. And okay, there have been accolades for the openness of the RAW4D process. And Gabriel's asking, did you get a sense that open education is working in and for Africa? Certainly from the projects that we heard reported on in African universities, it seems that there is significant progress around open education, but there are as many issues around institutional commitment to the use of open resources and open practices, and that really it is, so much of this is about whether a whole institution comes on board rather than just individual lecturers. And it does sound like those kinds of issues We're very similar to issues reported on from other continents. But I think what's different sometimes from African contexts would be some of the bandwidth and infrastructure issues as well. Glenda, I'm wondering if you want to come in on this, because I think you will also have some.
Yes, I think as far as the AVU project, that's an excellent project to follow, where the African Virtual University has used open education resources from a number of their allied institutions. And they're now producing some very interesting research on that. And that's also one of the Raw4D projects. And that's something worth following. And certainly I know that Brenda would have some experience with this, looking at some of the big projects that Sadie have been involved in Africa. But I do feel that it's only pockets, and we have a big job ahead of us to make more people aware of the power of open education resources.
Thank you, Glenda. There is a question from Olufemi. How much could OER contribute to quality education, and how much of this can motivate education practices across a different range of course offerings? And what I'm thinking of here is the massive investment of time and development that's gone into a range of resources for school education developed by a project in South Africa called Siavula, which is really making an impact on the access of scholars to high quality teaching and learning materials. And I suspect that there were a number of other projects which also exemplify the possibility that high quality, well supported OER can make a good contribution to education. Sukaina or Glenda, would you like to come back in on this one? I notice Glenda's just back. Good. Okay. Maybe someone else will pick up on that in a minute or so. And then there's a question from Alice, who's asking how similar or different are the resources for open education as reported in the different contexts that were reported. Glenda, maybe, Glenda's disappeared again. But I'm wondering, Sukaina, if you had any sense of that, or Brenda as well.
Sure. If I understand correctly, I think Alice is asking about formats of resources, perhaps. In terms of the Raw4D project, we're still reporting on if the question is which OER are more used in different contexts or in different regions. So I don't have an answer to that. But we are learning that what we are really learning is that it's really difficult for people to remix and revise OER. A lot of OER are being used as is, which is fine in the sense that it's a free resource that can be reused. But some of the promise of OER, and really this is what we need to find out, what are the possibilities, is that if you can use OER for revising, recontextualizing, localizing, translating, then the power of that OER is going to be much more for your context. And those skills, which we could call open education practices, are really, difficult to find in the research, and we're learning what it is that it takes to support those types of services, whether it's institutional policy, whether it's incentives for academics, whether it's specialists who can assist educators and teachers. So I think what Glenda was also saying about awareness, it's also, yes, we know that awareness of OER and awareness of licensing is low across all the regions, but it's also how can people go beyond just using resources as they are and using the affordances that are implicit in the licensing for pedagogical innovation. And that's really a kind of key challenge in question. Glenda's arrived now, so I don't know if Glenda, you want to add. She's arrived in my office now. She's like a...
No, I know. I'm sorry about that, everybody. No, I'm not going to add to that.
Okay, I think we're almost at the end.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sukaina, answering on my behalf.
Okay, the question about licensing and awareness of things like Creative Commons licenses certainly came up in relation to how university educators use OERs and even think about the possibilities of issuing OERs, and became clear that variable and lack of awareness about Creative Commons is a challenge, and this came up in relation to studies of university colleagues in India as well as in African universities. Okay, Gabriel's got one. How can those who are passionate about open education and OERs best support the use of OERs in traditional higher education institutions? Gabriel, are you here assuming that this is about people who are within the institution or people who are outside the institution wanting to work from a policy and strategy level? Let's see what you say. Okay, Gabriel, is this for people within or outside the institutions? Sukaina, do you want to respond to this one?
I'm going to let Glenda, because Glenda's been quite involved in this.
Great.
Gabriel, yeah, I think we've collected a lot of different resources that are available online around open education and OERs, and the work of Sadie, the work of Law4D, and others. We've collected quite good support documents around the use of OERs, and I think we need to kind of make people aware that these support documents are around. And certainly from a personal point of view, if anyone ever wanted me to come and talk about OERs, whether it's in this kind of format or as a recorded slideshow or anything like that, I would always be willing to come and do that. And I think there are a number of us who are very passionate about OERs, who would really like to support the use of OERs across different institutions. At UCT, we've got a model of a kind of a multi-pronged approach, where we have some guiding policy. We have a repository where academics can share their open education resources. And then we also have some local expertise in Creative Commons. So we've found that kind of approach works to have sort of a multi-strand support process. We've also been fortunate enough to have very small grants. It's a very small amount of money, but just enough to support educators to either convert their materials into OERs or create new materials as OERs. So we find it's kind of a gentle nudging process. Unless there's a specific policy that is strictly enforced, it's really up to the individual academic to share their resources. Thanks, Gabriel. It's a great question. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Glenda. And we have Brenda saying start from the bottom up. if there's nothing happening, get something going. Pull colleagues and heads of department and people higher up into a conversation and awareness and get something moving. And I think she's absolutely right. But there is a point where the bottom-up strategy by itself does hit some limits. Yeah, she's referring to Open University of Tanzania, where you try to get the bottom-up and top-down approaches to meet in the middle. And that meeting in the middle is not so easy. Alice, thanks for your point about processes and tools. Colleagues, we've reached that magical time. The hour is over. And thank you very much to all of you for joining us, to the presenters, to Nicola, to Glenda, to Sukaina, to all the participants here. We will soon switch off the recording and share this recording with everybody in the Emerge Africa Network and anyone anywhere else who wants to engage with it. So it will have a bigger impact than the number of people who are here currently. And let's keep the conversation going. There will be a number of events about open education, open resources and open practices coming from Emerge Africa within the next several months. Thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony.